with me, Douglas Herbert, our foreign affairs commentator. And Doug, lots to unpack there, quite a lot of detail militarily, no surprise given they're both defence ministers. Perhaps, though, let's just start with sort of your big takeaways from the language that was used.
Yeah, look, I mean, anyone who was going into this press conference expecting perhaps the U.S. Defense Secretary, as some narratives had it, going to the Israeli Defense Secretary and reading the Riot Act and essentially saying, you better scale down your war because right now the toll, the rising death toll, casualty toll of civilians in Gaza, it's simply unacceptable from any perspective. Yes, the U.S. supports you, but this is unacceptable. You need to scale it back, and we need to know precisely how and why now. If that was sort of the narrative that had been written, reading that Riot Act, so to speak, to the Israelis, we didn't get that today. The general impression is, yes, the U.S. Defense Secretary was very clear in saying that protecting civilians is, as he put it, a strategic imperative and a moral duty. He was very clear on that. It was more than just paying lip service to the rising international calls to protect civilians and also for a ceasefire, which the U.S. doesn't support. However, much more, I'd say, outweighing the statements in favor of protecting civilians, the strategic imperative of doing so. My takeaway is that is the one of unstinting support for the Israeli military operation. Lloyd Austin called America's commitment to Israel unshakable. He endorsed, essentially, Israel's military strategy in going after Hamas to, as the Israeli defense minister said, to achieve its objective of dismantling, destroying Hamas, making sure that Hamas does not have the ability in the future, in the after-the-war period, to project terror, as he put it, into Israel. So the takeaway is that I heard a lot more of that, of this unbending commitment to Israel, and basically acquiescing or yielding the military ground to the Israelis, essentially saying, listen, this is the Israeli military operation. I can give insights. I can give my thoughts based on my experience and the U.S. experience fighting in densely populated urban areas, warfare in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and Syria. I can give my thoughts and advice, but I can't dictate the terms to the Israelis. So anyone who went in thinking, well, maybe this was an opportunity for the U.S. to, at least behind the scenes, put it very clearly and directly to the Israelis, scale it back or else. They didn't get that, at least not publicly today. And what we did get is a sense from the Israeli Defense Secretary that we don't know what was said behind the scenes, but at least in his public statements, you don't get the sense of a man who's running scared because the U.S. is wielding the Damocles sword of withdrawing its aid or withdrawing its support. We got the sense of a man who still knows the U.S. has his back, saying that we will prevail, and this is a war of national determination and national resilience. The war will take time, but he is a man who is doubling down today, the Israeli defense minister, and he's determined to continue this war to the end.
And there were some questions, Doug, about timeline.
Yeah.
And from both the US and the Israeli defense ministers, not a lot of specific as to how long this might actually go on for.
We got no specifics, really.
Yeah.
The timeline, in the reports we've read in various sources, whether in Israeli or U.S. media, we're saying maybe within the next few weeks, the idea would be to transition, as the phrase goes, from this high-intensity, heavy bombardment, the use of dumb bombs, to much more precise, lower-intensity, localized, hyper-localized, precision targeting of Hamas militants and leadership. We didn't get a timeline, and we heard some reporters specifically try to pin them down. What is the timeline? Israeli Defense Secretary, did you get any sense? Did you give a timetable? Did you give the U.S. Defense Secretary a better sense of what those objectives are? Mr. U.S. Defense Secretary, did you ask for that sort of timetable? There was a clear awkwardness on the U.S. part not to want to be seen as dictating terms to Israel, and on the Israeli side to make it clear, perhaps for domestic public opinion, that they are not going to take lecturing from the U.S., no matter how respectable and how much, he says he respects the U.S. Defense Secretary and his experience and his knowledge of urban warfare. Israel seems to be in the position, the posture right now, we are going to do what we want to do to achieve our objectives. The U.S. has our back on this. They understand we need to do that. And the U.S. is like, we will signal and say you need to protect civilians, but we will continue to give us support. We're not going to dictate terms to you. So No big breakthroughs in this press conference, nothing earth-shattering, nothing very surprising, both sides sticking to their narratives and both sides really not seeing completely eye to eye.